Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody. Tonight is episode number 44, and what I will do tonight is talk about some current events, some things that have been in the news lately, and really it's part of the point of this show is to point out the ridiculous science that is being pawned off onto you, the public. But I noticed something happening, and not very many people would notice this, but there's a lot of disinformation being promoted, for example, on YouTube. And the way it happens is, I call it blanket coverage. And what happens is that if there's a topic that they want to push, and sometimes these are what I call smokescreen topics. In other words, blanket coverage, no matter where you are on the internet, no matter where you are in the evening news, no matter where you are getting your information from, you're going to see this. That is blanket coverage. And when you see it, you know it's being pushed as a disinformation ploy. Whether it's a smokescreen to cover up something else, or whether it's a smokescreen to obfuscate a certain topic, or give people a certain perspective of a given topic, all of those things come into play. But here's a new one. Here's a new twist. Now, you've all heard of shadow banning. Shadow banning is, and it's still going on today. It's now actually illegal, but it's going on today. And of course, Twitter cured that by getting rid of the huge staffs that spent their whole existence doing that, shadow banning people and their topics, etc., and censoring and modifying topics and pushing topics. But it is alive and well on all the other social media and other general platforms. And so shadow banning is where they purposefully push certain topics or certain authors or certain sources out of the venue, and nobody gets to see it. In other words, when you search on something, say you search on a topic, comets, or search on a topic, whatever it is, Nazca lines is a good one. I'll be talking about that in a minute. Certain things are going to come up and other things are not. And so the things that are not promoted, even though they would be popular if people knew about it, that's called shadow banning, and they're supposed to be algorithms that are based on popular demand, on what the population wants to see. But that's not what happens. Let's just talk about it, go off topic a little bit here about AI, artificial intelligence, or ChatGPT. What they did is they went to Wikipedia, which is a totally controlled outlet. If you want to learn about science or say medicine or any of those hot topics today, Wikipedia is one of the biggest disinformation sources on the planet. And there again, shadow banning, giving negative reviews on things that they don't want the public to know about, censorship, and then promoting other things. So AI, supposed AI, it's not AI, it's relational database. The majority of what they say is AI today is not AI. It is simply relational databases. So they go out and pull out information, put it together into a story. So you ask a question, is the sky blue today? And it goes out and it picks up as much information as it can, and then it spits it out. That is not AI. ChatGPT is not AI. It is a relational database. Okay, so back to the idea of shadow banning. So shadow banning is purposefully suppressing information sources, etc. The opposite of that is happening, has been happening, but I want to point it out, and here's how it works. There are people, and I typically call these street people. A lot of people don't understand that the CIA is a huge disinformation source, and they're constantly working out to put out misinformation. And they work through television shows or radio shows or podcasts to move misinformation out to you, the public. So, and then they have guests. So a lot of these talk show hosts have what you might call handlers. And they approve and they disapprove on certain people or topics, etc. And but the idea is that the people they approve of, or the people they want to push, I call them street people because they don't have any real formal education. They might be, typically they are self-educated, so they have kind of a rough background in whatever they talk about, whatever they're pushing. Let me just say this, being a physicist, a well-trained physicist, I've worked in industry, I've worked in education at the university level, about 10 years teaching university level physics, mathematics, computer science. And then I've worked in industry for 25 years as a professional engineer, electrical engineer, mathematician, statistician. And so I have a legitimate background in all of these topics. But a lot of the people that you find are being pushed online don't have any background. They don't have any background at all. And so it's just kind of like, but the CIA will pick these people up, and I call them street people. And so I'm not going to drop names, but you can guess if you're listening to some of the big radio shows, the Joe Rogans, etc., who has a handler who's handling their information being pushed out. But the idea is that they'll take these people and promote them, and it is false promotion. And here's how it works. There's a topic that comes up, and all of a sudden one of these clowns makes a video. All of a sudden, 2 hours later after it's posted, there's 500,000 views. Well, and it's a quantum jump. It went from 0 to 500,000 like that, like 0 to 60, but it's a quantum jump. But 0 to 60 in an automobile is kind of like that's how you measure the acceleration of an automobile. It goes from 0 to 60 in so many seconds. And then you can compare the Porsche with the Tesla, with the BMW, with the, whatever, another car, VW Bug, whatever it is. And so they're kind of a standard. So 500,000 views on a YouTube channel is pretty good, especially if in the first few hours. But what they're doing is they're faking it. They're putting 500,000 views on, and what happens, then it's grabbed by the algorithm of YouTube, and it's promoted, and they go, oh, according to the algorithm, this is something everybody wants to see. So no matter who goes on the internet that day, they get a spoonful of whatever this video is. Or in the same way with other social media. Because all the other social medias, the Instagrams, and all have algorithms based on popularity. And so that's what the term going viral means. That they're actually, because of popular demand, because people like this, and then they send it and they like it. But what I'm telling you is this is then faked for the people, for the topics, for the subject matter that they want to promote. And within this subject matter is a good deal of information, good deal of misinformation. And there's also a rule in misinformation. It can't be pure misinformation. There's 2 or 3 points that are the subject, the actual content that they want to push as misinformation. And then it's generally mixed with a bunch of other chat, let's put it that way, that that is like filler, like what we call fluff in the industry, and so but these are being promoted falsely, and this is what I'm telling you is that you can tell these, and so a couple of the topics I'm going to talk about today have had that experience of some of these topics. Okay, so anyway, I want you to know that when you wake up in the morning, you turn on your phone, you scroll through it a few times just to get your eyes open, and there's a few things there. Those things are targeted, and probably a lot of them have gone this route where they're actually promoted falsely and given false numbers. And then you look at it and you read it and you think, oh, this is what everybody else is reading. And then you see the numbers. And additionally, the people that are doing the promotion, the street people, get rewarded quite well because they have 500,000 views on YouTube for a little couple, maybe 15-minute video or something. That's pretty good. And if you're doing this on a daily basis, by the end of the year, you're doing pretty darn good. But it's fake. And those people wouldn't get the time of day. The other way you tell these people is, number one, they have really spiffy web pages, a lot of flash, a lot of glamour. Their YouTube videos are usually high production. So they'll have animations. If there's a volcano going off, there'll be an animation of a volcano going off, or there'll be other footage inserted. And so there's a lot of things that, the average guy that has a podcast, say, for example, like myself, I don't have the resources to have that level of sophistication, artwork, and visual support. So the end result is that you have to look at these kind of signs. So somebody that has all of this support, where did it come from? Typically, they're not doing it. They have handlers, they have people, they have access to staff that they normally wouldn't have access to. And so it makes it much more palatable. And then the other thing is the information. So they have people out there getting information and feeding it to them, a lot of times from the government. And so back in the early 2000s, during the late 1990s, the early 2000s, there were disinformation campaigns dealing with the topic of Planet X. And there were people who had vast amounts of resources. And these are people that you wouldn't give the time of day to at all. I mean, given there's just wacko people with a wacko story that doesn't make any sense at all, yet highly, highly promoted. And, a very, very glossy, appearance, and information being fed to them on a daily basis from agencies like NASA. So being supported with photographs of star systems and other things and finding out dates for things, for astronomical events that only would be known by somebody internal to NASA. And so anyway, this has been going on for a long time, this promotion of what I call street people to influence you, the public. Okay, so anyway, enough of that, but I'll give you a couple examples here. Here's one. Oh my goodness, right out of the chute. You probably could not have gone any place on the internet, on the news media, evening news, without seeing this one. That some people claim to have measured below the Great Pyramid in Giza and claim that there are cylindrical structures that go down very deep under the Great Pyramids, and that they have electrical coils and there's some kind of electrical, something built under the Great Pyramid. And I've looked at the data, I've looked at the published articles, and all I can tell you is that you got to take this with a really big grain of salt. Because, first of all, this technology, when you look at the results, it's very inconsistent. And the other thing is, have they done this with other pyramids? Is there like some kind of, there's a lot of weight from the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, all of 2.4 million stones, a couple million stones piled on the ground there would certainly cause compression in the ground. And so that would be something to look at as a possible reason for these like hard structures underneath the pyramid, whereas they're not adjacent. But the other thing is, where's the corroborating evidence? Who else has done this? Third-party independent verification. Have they done this around other pyramids? And when they see the reflection from the radio signals that they're driving into the ground and then they reflect back, have they gone out in the middle of the desert and seen, is this something that's common? Is it an artifact of their equipment? I don't see any corroborating evidence or experiment that would give you a norm. Like, for example, if you do, say, a drug test, a test of pharmaceutical drugs, there are different standards for your blind tests or giving placebos in a test scenario to people to see if the actual drug that you're passing out works, if it causes harm, or all of these other factors related to the medical, promotion or the testing of pharmaceuticals. And so in any kind of scientific experiment, there are similar standards to vet the results of anything like this. So, but the point is that this has received blanket coverage. Evening News, any place, if you've been on the internet at all, you would have seen this. And the end result is it's very sketchy results. And everybody's promoting it like, oh my goodness, look at this. There are pillars, there are electrical circuits under the Great Pyramid. And when in reality, they really don't have very good information at all. They don't have data, they don't have corroboration, they don't have they don't have testing at other locations to corroborate what they're doing is even valid. And so you can't do experiments like this like a one-off experiment. Okay, that's good, a start, but it's way too premature to give it this level of blanket coverage, and that's the problem. So when you see this, you know that somebody, and this is what I also say about street people, when they pick up on a topic like this and push it that hard, then you know that something is amiss. Because in a normal world, it wouldn't receive the time of day. In a normal world, in let's say a mathematical discovery, it would take typically a long time for it to work its way through the vetting process, and they would be very strict and very negative, even if it came out to be true, unless it was done by. Anyway, the idea is that in any scientific endeavor, there has to be some vetting process, and it simply did not happen. They took the results, they somehow got it published in a journal, and all of a sudden it took off. But the point is that there's no reason to give it this level of coverage. That is the bigger story. Why is it receiving this level of coverage? So anyway, next topic, and this just popped up, its ugly little head again. I think the second show I did in this series back in July of 2024, I talked about the Nazca lines. Now these are lines that are created out in the Nazca Plains just north of Cusco, out in the Peruvian, there's like Altiplano in Peru with these lines. They were first noticed by a pilot in World War II named Paul Koskov, I believe his name was pronounced. But anyway, he's flying an airplane over this region of Peru about the time World War II is going on, and he sees these lines. Well, the people had seen the lines before, but they didn't know what they were, and from the person's perspective on the ground, they look like just paths, really not a figurine. And so from the air, though, you see the figures, the fanciful figures, the monkey and the pelican and the other birds, the hummingbird and the whale and spirals, and etc. So anyway, about a year and a half ago, or maybe more, a couple years ago, some Japanese people went over there and they took aerial photographs and they put them into a computer using artificial intelligence. And once again, it's really not artificial intelligence, it's relational databases where they searched for figures, etc., in the sands. Now, the real lines in Nazca are formed by digging a trough, removing a little bit of the sand, and what's this? I've been there. I have a major study that's done showing that the Nazca lines are antennas. They're fractal antennas. Anyway, that's another story. Go watch my earlier show on this topic. But this story coming out that AI has somehow discovered 300 plus new figures in the desert is bogus, because the Nazca lines are big. They're the size of a football field, some of them larger. And these so-called new AI discovered Nazca lines are small, like the size of a desk. And the way the real lines are formed, you scoop out a little bit of material and the entire Nazca plain is covered with a cream-colored sand, very fine sugar type sand. And then they move these rocks. Now the rocks are high energy, or high iron content rocks, so they're red. They've got that iron oxide look to them, reddish. And so they're strewn, and they're like fist size and smaller. And they're strewn all over the plain, like every couple inches is another one of these rocks. So they moved the rocks aside in nice, neat rows and shapes, and built these, what turn out to be antennas, fractal antennas. And so anyway, like I say, that's another story. But the idea that somehow these AI efforts found 300 plus new Nazca lines is simply false. And it keeps coming back up, it keeps hitting the news media, and it did again this past week. Now, one of the old reasons they never could figure out why these Nazca lines were there, but the obvious reason they keep pumping that story is to obfuscate the fact that these were made by somebody. We don't even know if they were human beings. They could have been aliens stranded here from another star system. And they built these antennas that have the capability of telecommunicating with foreign star systems. That's how big they are. They're huge. And just to give you an idea, a fractal antenna in the corner of your cell phone is just a little patch about this big, and that's what you use in your cell phone for an antenna. Back in the old days, you had to pull out a dipole antenna and then talk on your phone. Well, that's been replaced. That antenna has been replaced with a fractal antenna. a little teeny antenna, but the huge fractal antennas on the Nazca Plains are big enough to communicate with another star system. So we don't know who built them. These articles keep claiming it was the Nazca people. Well, there's no Nazca people. Nobody knows anything about it at all. And so the article is pure misinformation. And then one of the early beliefs of archaeologists and other people who studied the Nazca lines was that they were for prayer. In other words, you would walk around these paths and say your prayers and meditate or whatever. And that's what they were for. But obviously, nobody ever understood, like I did, when I went there and discovered they were fractal antennas. Nobody had a clue. And so people said, oh, they were landing strips for the gods. They were the, to call in aliens, that they were for prayers, their prayer paths or whatever. And not a single one of those reasons was correct. So they've revived the idea that the Nazca lines are for prayer, the walking around, which is ridiculous. Because there's no reason, there's nothing there that would indicate that these were used for, or that anybody would walk around them at all. In fact, if you walk across the desert there, your footprints will be preserved basically forever. And so they restrict people from walking out there. So clearly, they're not walking paths, because you would see the traffic that would have been preserved in the Nazca lines by people walking in them. And you don't see that. So to revive the idea that these were walking paths for prayer is they're just grabbing for straws. They're grabbing for any story to make this, to try and put out misinformation to the public. Because what if on a large scale the public found out that there were antennas, fractal antennas, large enough to communicate with other star systems, built by entities that we don't know who they were? I mean, that's a huge story. So this gets blanket coverage out to you, the public, and it keeps going on. It keeps occurring and keeps being pushed out as a top story. So once again, you would be hard-pressed to go on the internet without seeing this fake story. And then again, they promote it. They put that out there, and then they give it false numbers. I have seen personally in mathematical journals. Now, a lot of the mathematical journals are online. And you will find a paper that is disinformation in the mathematics world, is something that I happen to know quite a bit about because I worked in industry as a mathematician in the telecommunications industry. And so there are mathematical papers out there that have, typically a math paper might get 1,500, 2,000 downloads, reviews, and things like that, and comments, a couple comments, but not 40 or 50,000 overnight. So those are being created by bots. And then also the other thing you notice like I was talking about, the wannabes, the street people that the CIA picks up to push their disinformation out to the public, is that you look at the comments under the video or whatever it is, Instagram, whatever, where the blogs are, and they have all of these praising, oh my good, this person is next to God. He is so smart, you're so intelligent, oh, we are so lucky to have you on planet Earth. And so that kind of, and these are done by AI engines that sprinkle these comments, so there again, you'll have within a few hours, 500,000 views and maybe 2,000 comments. And they're all this praise, oh my goodness, you're the smartest man in the world, and everything else. You know that this is being generated as disinformation. Okay, now here's an interesting story. It's about a bear, a cave bear, it's called, that lived prior to the last ice age. And the the story claims that this bear was 39,500 years old is when it lived, but it was flash frozen in the Siberian tundra along with a lot of other mastodons, but it gave them the DNA. And now there are stories that, remember Jurassic Park, where they're trying to revive the dinosaurs, where they had an experiment, they found dinosaur bones or whatever. They took the DNA and then were able to rebuild the dinosaurs and created this island, and of course called Jurassic Park. But they're actually claiming that they can do this now with live elephants, which apparently are descendants of the mastodons, and the same with this bear, who was related to the bears of today. Very interesting. But now I want to go through this scenario, and I'm sure many people have heard about this. But how could a bear or mastodon, an animal that large, be flash frozen to the point where even their delicate tissues had not even begun to decompose? And now remember that where these animals lived was a temperate climate, and now they are flash frozen in the tundra of Siberia, which is above the Arctic Circle. And of course, this relates to the fact that there was a pole shift. And there, once again, I saw recently a total disinformation, somebody who absolutely had no idea what he was talking about. And there again, street people that have no training of any kind, no physics background, don't understand what they're saying, has no meaning, but talking about a magnetic pole shift and somehow relating it to incidents that may have happened on Earth, ice ages, etc. But the reality is that the Earth undergoes magnetic pole shifts a few times a month. It's a very common occurrence where the sun's, the magnetic field that's locked into the solar wind is reversed. It comes out with the negative pole down, and it interacts with Earth's magnetic field, which is a plasma magnetic field. It cannot reverse our geomagnetic field, but the plasma magnetic field will temporarily reverse. And we don't have pole shifts, physical pole shifts, or we don't have changes in the ice sheets or melting of ice sheets, etc. So the only way you can have a real pole shift, where you have physically the pole shift of the rotational pole of Earth, which is at the North Pole and the South Pole, the only way that can happen is with a large passing celestial object that sends a gravitational wave into the surface of the Earth. And I've talked about this repeatedly. In fact, a teaching technique, people say, well, you repeat this. Yes, it's a teaching technique that I learned when I used to teach university level classes, and if there's something I want people to really remember, I repeat it. So the only way a planet like Earth could have a pole shift is that, and this is the rotational pole, this is the physical pole of Earth, not the magnetic pole, is by a large object passing by Earth, setting up a gravitational wave and shifting the crust of Earth, the crust and the mantle, over the molten core, because the Earth is kind of like a soft-boiled egg. It's molten on the inside, and it has this very thin layer on the outside that we call the crust and the mantle. And when the gravitational wave comes in, grabs the Earth basically, and it rotates it. And then very quickly that surface, because of viscosity with the central part of the Earth, which is molten, picks up and it starts rotating again. And so you have a change in rotational velocity. The angular velocity of Earth changes, which reflects in the length of the day. But the only way this can happen is because of a large passing celestial object, and it would be in the form of a comet. not some big orange ball or what people perceive as Planet X being a Jupiter-like object. It would be in the solar system as a very large comet. Okay, next I want to talk about, this is very, very interesting. A long time ago, it might have been a few decades ago, that it was discovered by looking at the moon and the space around the moon, our own moon, Earth's moon, that the moon had a sodium tail. Now that's very interesting, because the first thing that standard astronomy would want to say about that is that, oh, that must be coming off the surface of the moon. Well, the moon has all kinds of materials. It's made up of many different elements. And so why would sodium selectively be carried off the surface of the moon? And so they have to come up with this completely convoluted story. But the reality is that the moon is acting as a comet, and it is drawing in the sodium. The sodium is coming in to it. There is another case where the moon Io of Jupiter has what is known as a torus. It's like a ring that Io moves in, and of course the standard NASA story always gets it backwards. They say that is material coming off of Io. The reality is it's material that's being drawn into Io, but Io is moving so rapidly in its orbit that that the material that's being drawn in forms a ring. So the ring material is actually being drawn into Io. It's building up, and it's discharging the local fusion-based capacitor of Jupiter, which is a small star. Jupiter is not a planet. It's the twin star to our sun. Okay, but the point of this discussion, what I'm leading up to here, is that Mercury, little Mercury, now this is something I predicted 1979. You can look in my published work. And I said that Mercury, because of the precession of Mercury, what you will find is that Mercury will be acting as a comet and drawing in material, which is tail drag, which is causing its orbit to change. So now it's finally been discovered and announced. So being discovered is one thing. That was many years ago. NASA discovered this when they had a probe that was near the planet Mercury. And therefore, it took them a while to actually make the announcement, because they, once again, had to come up with this convoluted argument for why only sodium would be lifted off the surface of the planet Mercury and drawn into what they call a tail. And so they're making, of course, the mistake of claiming that this material is being drawn off and pushed away from Mercury by some convoluted process that only selects sodium. How interesting. And why sodium? Because there's an abundance of sodium in the solar system. Simple as that. And that's the same sodium that is being drawn into the tail of our moon, the same material. And so the end result is twofold. Mercury is acting as a comet, and secondly, that drag on the tail is causing the precession of Mercury, which is a physical process and not due to general relativity. And so this is something I've been waiting for a long time, because it's the other missing piece of the entire basis for general relativity. One of the so-called proofs of general relativity is the idea that Mercury precesses in its orbit, and it's because of curved space because of the mass of the sun, and it's an exaggerated curved space, and therefore that supposedly causes the precession of Mercury. But no, finally the true answer has been discovered and announced, and that is because of the tail drag on the planet Mercury, and it's due to sodium. But I'm sure, now the other thing is the way they discovered this was with absorption lines. In other words, spectroscopy, they were able to identify sodium, but I'm certain they're going to find that there are other elements in the tail of Mercury, the comet tail, that are being drawn into the planet Mercury, including iron because of its proximity to the sun. So that's yet to be discovered. So far they've only identified sodium. Okay, so that's a very interesting story, one that's been literally decades in the making. And like I say, that's something I predicted a long time ago. The other cornerstones of general relativity are the bending of light around the sun. Remember the Eddington experiment, and then all of a sudden also the gravitational lensing that is claimed when we look out and we see galaxies, and supposedly there's a galaxy perfectly aligned with another galaxy causing a gravitational lensing, but it's not gravitational lensing. It's due to the non-uniform electric field that surrounds fusion-based stars and galactic nuclei. Any fusion-based object is going to have a non-uniform field because of the non-uniform distribution of protons in the fusion wind that's coming off. And that's the same way with our solar system. That's why comets discharge that capacitor. That's what creates the Kuiper belt and the dust cloud that the planets are forming in the Kuiper belt. Once again, there is the misconception in standard astronomy that what they are seeing, the microwave background radiation, what they believe what they're looking at is a remnant from the Big Bang, but what they're actually seeing is the dust cloud that surrounds our solar system. And it's the same dust cloud that is the source of material for all the planets forming out there. So once again, I predicted the planets in the Kuiper belt, something that was not discovered until probably 20 years ago. And also the fact that the Big Bang and general relativity depend on these interpretations of these phenomena, the dust cloud that surrounds our sun. That's really what they're seeing with the microwave background radiation. It's not due to the Big Bang. It's simply due to a dust cloud that's very cool, about 3 degrees Kelvin, 3-degree background radiation, given off. It's basically what we call black body radiation in physics. Black body radiation is simply like the heat of infrared or microwave, very cool light coming off this cloud of dust. And another way to understand this is, unless astronomers get their detectors, their cameras, their detecting devices outside of this cloud, eventually if they do, they would see that they would be able to detect that cloud is surrounding our sun. You can see these clouds surrounding other stars, the microwave background radiation surrounding other stars. You can see it. And so this, once again, there are more and more physicists deciding that the Big Bang is simply not true. The James Webb Telescope data, the recent discoveries, James Webb Telescope, are fundamental in dislodging the Big Bang as any kind of rational theory at all. And then also, by the way, remember dark matter and dark energy, which they need. They created it out of thin air because the Big Bang mathematics do not add up. And so there again, there's no reason for dark energy nor dark matter, which they don't even know what it is. But because of the modeling they do, because they believe the Big Bang is the correct theory for the state of the universe, they have to invent dark matter and dark energy to be 99% of the material in the universe. But now there's no need for it anymore because the Big Bang is dead. Okay, we're going to switch gears here. I see some kind of an issue going on with my camera. Anyway, I have to live with that. The next topic is an interesting one, and it's been around for a long time, and it goes back and forth, but I want to comment on this because it's so much in the news today, and that's what this particular show is about topics that are in the news. But this is, how on earth did they move these giant structures, for example, with the Great Pyramid, or put there's all kinds of stonework which is just incredibly precise, and it looks like modern machining on the very hardest rock and granite, and rock that's even harder than granite. How did they do this without, supposedly with copper tools? And so there's really no explanation. So you have two camps basically, and this has been around, like I say, for a long time, that one camp is the traditional camp, the camp of traditional archaeology, that the Egyptians did this. They had millions of slaves, and they pulled these big things by rope, and put grease from animal grease or animal fat or something like that. And then but the quarries were in some cases thousands of miles away from where the rocks were finally laid. Or then you have the Peruvian walls with these polygonal structures that fit like a glove. You cannot get a piece of paper in between them. And so the question is, how did they do this? So then the explanation, it comes from the alternative side, is that there must have been ancient technologies that we cannot see. We don't find anything in the record. And then you find, for example, that the Great Sphinx shows erosion. Well, that is easily explained because of the Noah's Great Flood. But see, neither side, this is the interesting part, both sides make the same mistake. They, first of all, put a date on something, first big mistake. And second of all, they don't include the major events, physical events that Earth has experienced in the last 5,000 years. So some of them put this out, the alternative media, and by the way, this is headed by people who are really weak, let's just put it that way, in terms of education. They're self-appointed experts, so to speak. And so you have on one side the standard ivory tower archaeologist who sits in his office and proclaims things from afar. Probably many of them have never been in the field at an archaeological site like I have. Been at archaeological sites. For the one I mentioned on this show previously was when I was young. I lived in Mexico City, and due to the contacts of a friend of mine, was able to get out to a site that's now an active tourist site near Cuernavaca, near Mexico City. And at the time, they were just beginning to dig it up. I mean, within maybe a week of it being discovered, there were archaeologists on site. They were employing the people from the little local town and digging up the top of this pyramid. And it had probably 10 feet of dirt on it. So it's not something that was covered up during the time of the Aztecs. It was not a structure that you could attribute to the modern Aztecs. And then you have the Toltecs north of Mexico City, these big columns, intricately carved. And so who were the Toltecs? We don't have any record. They had clearly an advanced culture. And then you go south to places like Monte Alban, which there again, is it a cross between the Aztecs? Is it Mayan? Is it some ancient culture we don't know about? There are so many questions here. And one of the problems too is that there is a mixture of cultures. There is a tremendous mixture of ancient cultures. We know that the Olmecs preceded the Mayans, and you find these Olmec heads. You'll find that what they call the various other structures that are out in the jungle, just sitting there. Big rocks that are intricately carved, like monuments that are sitting out in the middle of the jungle with nothing around. I've seen these with myself. So who did these? The mistake that both sides make is that, first of all, they put a date on something. And it's the one puts the date on that all of the modern Mayas, what I call modern Mayas, the 800 AD Mayans, did this, or that the Aztecs did it. When I was living in Mexico City, they were digging the subway, the tunnels for the subway system there. They were still in the process of constructing the subway system, which was beautiful. I believe they purchased it from the French, so it's very similar to the subway system in Paris. And so as they were digging the tunnels, they would discover monuments, 100 feet underground. Well, sorry, buddy. And they would attribute it to the Aztecs, and they'd go, oh, this is an altar to so-and-so god or something. They didn't know that. Absolutely just absurdities. And when I was on site at this location near Cuernavaca, and they were just beginning to dig up, they would dig up something, and there would be I remember one was this big stone mask that the shamans would wear during ceremony or something. And immediately the archaeologists, oh, that is from the classic period. Wait a minute. This is a pyramid that preceded the Aztecs, clearly because of the amount of dirt on it. This had to have been maybe tens of thousands of years old to get that much dirt just accumulated on the top of this pyramid. When they discovered the Catherwoods and Stevens went down and were the first, what you might call modern people, there were these rumors of the Mayan ruins. So they took a ship down to Yucatan, Quintana Roo, went inland and found these Mayan ruins, which have been rebuilt. But Catherwood captured these on these big, amazing plates. Very beautiful artwork. He was an artist. And it brings out what it was like trees growing out of the pyramids, with the roots going in them and the rocks falling down, clearly over the millennia, that the tree roots had grown in and moved the rocks, and the rocks had tumbled down. And that's how they saw these, and some parts of the structure still in good shape. But the point is, they would attribute these to the classic period, the modern Maya, around 800 to 1100 AD. And I've been all over these cities, but what we discovered too, I went back in the 1990s and surveyed, for example, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Tulum, and various other places, and determined that the Old North Pole was in the north of the state of Michigan in Canada. It now turns out that it's around Hudson Bay. But Chichen Itza is not aligned northeast, south, and west with our cardinal coordinates. It's 13.5 degrees off, and if you trace that up and you start tracing up the other, if you survey the coordinates of the other cities, they don't point to our north, south, east, and west poles. And so the end result is that what they did is they built the modern cities that we see today on top of the old gridwork, not understanding that there had been a pole shift. And this is my entire point of talking about this. And I will add here that unfortunately I see people copying my work regarding the tidal wave pole shifts in trying to publish it, and that'll be called out very soon. I don't take kindly to people plagiarizing my work and then pretending that they're great discoverers. But anyway, back to the root issue. Now, add in, because the standard archaeological camp wants to claim that the Egyptians, for example, these big structures at Luxor or at Giza, in the Giza Plateau or other places, were done by hand and dragged along the ground. Well, let me go back to the Peruvians, and this is something that's very well established. So you have the new camp, the Nouveau camp, trying to say, well, that's impossible, they had to have advanced technology. And the Peruvians were still building these walls when the Spanish arrived, so the Spanish have notes on how they moved these big rocks. And they literally dragged them right along the ground. They didn't put them, some of them they put on wooden pallet type structures and moved them along the ground. But they used a process that is used in cabin building now. When I was young, I built a log cabin. I cut the trees, let them dry in the woods, took the bark off, had a friend with a horse move the logs around, and went through the process where you take it's called scribing. And you can scribe below the logs or on the side of the logs, and that's how these logs fit together like a glove. And so that's what they were doing in Peru, and they actually have the record of this and of them moving the big rocks, and some of the rocks are still in the process of being quarried and moved, etc. So we know how the Peruvians built these walls. Then you have the situation with the Nazca Lines, something I've studied, and this is definitely done by some group. We don't know who. They may have been aliens. Maybe there were aliens lost here, and they built these fractal antennas to communicate with other star systems, like phone home type of thing, ET. But we don't know. It could have been mankind, but it was definitely a long time ago. And there again, in 2015, I published my paper showing how the Nazca Lines were fractal antennas for telecommunications. And fractal antenna is the type you have in your cell phone, for example, or in a tablet or any modern telecommunications, especially the portable kind, because the fractal antennas are small, they're compact. And so anyway, in the next number of weeks, I'll be talking more about pole shifts and the tidal effects of large celestial objects coming by Earth, going into more detail, and I'm going to have some special guests dealing with this issue from a very different perspective. So that'll be very interesting. But this controversy back and forth of how did they move these blocks, or how did they erect these large vertical structures, and there was an interesting scene in the movie. This was what, in the 1950s, when I was a little kid, the Ten Commandments, Moses and the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. But they show in there how they erected some of the structures, and how they used a method removing sand, which is very interesting. So they would move them and erect, put a ramp, and then drop them into basically a base that had a little groove in it. But I'm running out of time here, so I just want to remind you, go to the webpage jmccwaterfilters.com, jmccwaterfilters.com, and you can get a 10% discount on any of the great water filter products there using the coupon code MASTER, M-A-S-T-E-R. Get a 10% discount. There's the whole house water filters, the gravity water filter replacement elements. So once again, go to that webpage and for the best water filter products on the planet.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.